Hello, I'm John. Welcome back. So today I've got three books to talk about. Uh, I actually have several more books that I have read, but I thought that I would do three to kind of get myself back into the flow. It's been a little while since I've made a video. Um, it has been pretty bad here weather-wise. A couple of weeks ago, it was wet and cold and windy all the time. It was raining and just miserable. And then snow moved in, so we had several days of snow, and then all that melted, and then we had several more days of snow, and it's been really interesting too because it's been very dry snow, and we are just not used to dry snow here. We usually get very wet snow, and so it's it's the sort of snow if it's just like a powder, you try to make like a snowball or something, and it just falls completely apart. There's nothing in there to bind it together. Uh, So that has been interesting. It's been down in I think I saw it, I think it was 5 degrees the other day. It was a little bit warmer today. But anyway, I have been reading a lot. That's my roundabout way of saying that I have been reading a lot. So I just thought that I would break it apart and do a few books today and maybe a few books in another video. That is right there. That is the stack of books that I have read over the past 2.5 weeks or so. I think it's missing one, but the last one is a play, Death of a Salesman. I read Death of a Salesman, so I should be talking about that soon. But so there's like two action thriller type books, and then there's one that's Japanese literature. There is James Axler's Deathlands, Northstar Rising. This is the 10th in the Deathlands series. We have Athabasca by Alistair MacLean and Hikaru Okuizumi's The Stones Cry Out. So we'll start with Deathlands. We'll do this in order. So Deathlands, James Axler's Deathlands, Northstar Rising. There is no James Axler, actually. That is a house name, and I was not able to find out who wrote this book. In most of these books where there's a house name, you can turn to the copyright page and it will say thanks to so-and-so. But I'm finding on these Deathlands books that they don't usually attribute the author. So this is pretty normal post-apocalyptic style writing from the 80s. There is a group of people who have lived in this wasteland their entire life from all over the country, and they are led by your Snake Plissken type hero, kind of mixed with Rambo, very, very 80s. And they are all experts in different kinds of fighting and that sort of thing. And one of them is an empath, and she can kind of see the future and sense things around them. One is an armorer, and his entire job is to go around and say what every weapon is that appears in the book. And there is an albino kid from the Louisiana swamps, and he's really good with knives and that sort of thing. And there is a man named Doc Tanner, and he was part of an experiment. So he was from the 1800s. He was brought forward in time by some people doing some time travel experimentation or wormhole experimentation, and of course he was shocked and in terrible spirits and very, very, very angry to be torn out of his life, away from his wife and his kids. And he became such a hassle to the people who brought him that they put him back in the machine and they sent him forward in time by 200 years. And so he finds himself in the Deathlands, and they travel from place to place throughout the world in these portals. So they find these hidden bunkers, right? And in them are these portals. They are a room, and they go in the room, and they get transported to someplace, and they never know where they're going, and they don't really know how to control it. They just know how to jump. And so the previous book to this one, they were in Moscow, and I haven't read that one. And they jump to let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So Minnesota, and there is something to do with Minnesota. Uh, it's been about 3 weeks since I read this, maybe a little more, honestly. I was already behind by the time I did my last check-in video. So they go to Minnesota and they get out of this portal and they walk out and everything is really messed up. Well, at first they go for a portal and everything is really messed up, so they have to actually go back and jump somewhere else. And they find themselves in Minnesota, and it is a tropical paradise now. So there was a big nuclear war 200 years before this. The radiation has turned all these bugs and things really, really large, turned Minnesota into a tropical paradise. And Ryan Cawdor, who is this guy right here, he knows there's a cryogenics lab somewhere nearby because he saw it on a map one time. So they go to this cryogenics lab to unthaw some people. I can't remember exactly why they want to unthaw the people, but they do. And they go in there, and in this one there's just a bunch of heads in jars, and one of them accidentally hits this button, and all the heads thaw out, and they panic, and they break loose of their jars and are rolling around on the ground and stuff. It was really kind of strange. But they do find a room full of people who are full body. And one of them is Dr. Mildred. I want to say her name was Mildred Wyeth. Yes, Mildred Wyeth. And she is a doctor of cryogenics who was frozen because she had an allergic reaction during a surgery. So they just flash froze her, basically. And they thaw her out, and she is also... She was an Olympic gold medalist in pistol target shooting. So she's like the perfect person to fall into this group. And she doesn't seem bothered by the fact that her family, her kids, her husband, they've all been dead for several hundred years, and there was a huge nuclear war. And she just decides to travel with these people. I guess she's a very pragmatic person. And they go back into the tropical forest, and all of a sudden, all these animals start running out of the woods toward them. And they don't know what's happening, but they hear this noise. And there are some people who maybe already know when you hear a noise kind of like rushing water and all the animals are running for it. So they are right in the way of a huge swarm of ants. And the ants are about this long. And so they run all day long. They just run and run and run. They run so far that they get to... The tropical zone actually turns into a very cold climate. So I guess they go up in elevation or something. But it's very near one of the Great Lakes. And they hide in a tree. And for some reason, I didn't quite understand the ants leave them alone, which seems kind of odd because ants climb trees. But in the morning, they wake up and they find that the ants are all gone. But they find the skeleton of a dog, and it has like a name tag, like a leash or a collar and a name tag. And they think that's kind of odd, but they know that it's fresh. The ants ate it. And they do a little bit more wandering around. They come to the shores of the Great Lake there, and they encounter Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota Vikings, yes. And so there's a whole village of people who are living as Vikings, and they're all white. And they very reluctantly bring this group into their longhouse, and they're very bundled up, right? So they are not happy about having these outsiders, but they're going to let them stay, perhaps, until Mildred Wyeth takes off her hood, and she is a black woman, and they have never seen a black person before, and they freak out and think she is the angel of death. And pretty much all the tension in the remainder of the book is around them believing that Mildred Wyeth is the angel of death and that she has brought a plague upon them. But it's not really a plague, it's actually radioactive contamination that is killing them. And they are being attacked by mutants, and the tension of this book went up and then down and up and then down. And um, I've noticed something kind of odd about these Deathlands books that I don't really like that much. I've read, I think, 3 or 4 of them now. And it is that they will start off with an interesting premise, like the tropical forest in Minnesota, and then they will become about something completely different. And that has happened at least twice, I know. There was one book that I read, and it went all the way through just one plot premise. But the other ones all seem to be like a good idea, and then that idea runs out, so they smash it with another idea. I don't really care for that. I wish they would stick to one or the other. But it was entertaining. I enjoyed it. I liked the way that they figured this out and got out of this trouble, because the Vikings want to kill them all, basically. And they have to sort of convince the Vikings not to kill them and to outwit the Vikings. And of course, it ends where they jump through a portal again and go someplace else. So there are like 200 of these, maybe more. The next book was Alistair MacLean's Athabasca. I was really looking forward to this. This is the first Alistair MacLean book I've read this year. The last one I read was it Ice Station Zebra? I think it was Ice Station Zebra. That was pretty good. There were some problems with how the submarine worked in that book that I didn't quite care for. But Athabasca is not Alistair MacLean's best work. So this came out in the early 80s. Okay, 1980. From what I understand, Alistair MacLean was not in very good health by that period. He never liked writing anyway. He really liked to come up with ideas. He liked to have written a book, but he did not like writing. And that's from his own mouth. He did not enjoy writing. So I feel like Alistair MacLean really needed the paycheck for this book, unfortunately. It is told almost entirely through dialogue. It involves multiple characters that don't have any place being in this book at all, except to serve as a plot point. So what is it about? It is about, there are some people sabotaging an oil pipeline. 2 oil pipelines, actually. One's in Alaska, one's in Canada. They are, of course, asking for money. So they're going to sabotage this pipeline until the oil company pays them a great deal of money. And so people who run this company call in a sabotage investigator. And there are 2 of them. But one is just a sidekick. Like, his only job throughout this entire book is to serve as a sounding board for the main character. And so he could have just been left out entirely, and we could have just heard this through the main character's thoughts or something. So that was the first character that was really unnecessary to the plot. And then as this goes on, the man who runs the investigation company shows up with his wife and daughter. And he is completely unnecessary to the plot. His wife and daughter are unnecessary to the plot, except that they get kidnapped by the saboteurs. And so it becomes a book about trying to save the hostages and also trying to stop the sabotage and save the company money. It has some very, very redundant dialogue, some very redundant scenes. So the main character will tell one person, and then he'll tell another person. And there's a very, very obvious villain in this book. And, you know, it turns out to be that guy. There's like a couple of thrilling moments, right? So when the head of the investigation organization's wife and daughter are kidnapped, that's a pretty interesting scene, because they are stopped in the middle of the road at what they think is a car wreck, and then they are taken onto this helicopter, and they are with a secretary from the company, the oil company, and she jumps out of the helicopter into the snow. That was an interesting scene. Alistair MacLean always did action scenes very well. And the other one is that our main character, he is taken unaware and he is shackled to a bolt in the rock of this quarry, and they set this giant drag line. It's like this huge. It's hard to explain what a drag line is if you've never seen it. It is like a huge coal shovel, but it's like a hut on feet, and it has these huge cables, and there's a gigantic shovel, and these cables pull this shovel towards this hut, and it's pulling all this shale and all this oil shale towards the drag line. So some of them are a little different. There's a drag line. Uh, Not that any of you will be able to go see it. I'm not even sure if it's still there. There used to be a drag line from Coal Hill towards Altus, Arkansas. And you drive down this little highway, and off on the left, there is a drag line off in a field. And it is like a big sheet metal hut on tracks. It's really neat. I don't remember if it's a drag line or if it is just an actual shovel, but it's huge. It's like a house on tracks, you know. So anyway, it's walking towards this guy very slowly, and he has to figure out a way to escape, and I thought that was really good. But it was preceded by the most cheesy bad guy speech ever. So the bad guy shackles him to this bolt, and he gives this big speech about, ha ha ha, we have you now. What are you going to do? This is the end of you. And it's really bad. And yeah, it was not particularly good. It was a bit of a letdown for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed parts of it, but along the way, I was just thinking like, I think you needed that paycheck. And it really pains me to say that because I really love Alistair MacLean's books. I thought he did a really good job for a lot of them. But I know he also wrote a few stinkers, and unfortunately for me, this was one of them. So the last book is Hikaru Okuizumi's The Stones Cry Out. Hopefully I pronounced his name right. I didn't enjoy this book, to be honest with you. It's very, very short. And what it is about, there's a man named Manasseh, and we are seeing the course of his whole life in this short little book. And it starts in the beginning. Manasseh is a soldier in the Second World War. He's in the jungles of the Philippines towards the end of the Japanese occupation. So the Americans have come back to the Philippines and are routing the Japanese. And these soldiers have been left behind to fight a last stand in the jungle. And they hole up in a cave, and a lot of them are starving to death. There is a captain who is killing the incapacitated with his sword. And in the middle of the night, another captain starts talking to Manasseh, which is very out of character because that's just not how the Japanese army worked. It was very class oriented, and officers never ever mingled with the regular soldiers. If you've ever read about the Japanese army, even the way they treated each other was incredibly brutal. Anyway, so this man starts he holds up a piece of green rock, and it's clear that he probably doesn't even know that Manasseh is there. And he starts giving this geological lecture like he's in a classroom about rocks and stones, or rocks and geology and everything, and the strata of the layers of the earth and that sort of thing. I'm not very well versed in geology, if you can tell. So Manasseh doesn't think a lot of this really at the time, but he still has he has this rock from this guy, and he is eventually captured by the Americans, and he goes back home eventually. He makes it back home, I think, in 1946. His father had ran a bookstore before the war, and he had accumulated a lot of American books. So in the post-war era, there is a really big demand for these American novels. And so Manasseh sells them, even though his mother initially said that they were good for nothing and they should have been burned because nobody's going to want to buy that stuff. This is years before. And that sets him up as a success. He's able to open another bookstore, and at some point he starts collecting rocks. He starts to go out into the field, into creek beds and all sorts of things. He becomes very well versed in stones, and he learns how to polish stones, and he's gathering all these different rocks from his area and categorizing them, and it becomes this hobby, but also a bit of an obsession. It's just what he does every day, and that is the main focus of his life. So this is told in a very detached way. If you've ever read Japanese literature, you'll know that a lot of it is a very detached. It's told in a very practical sort of way. So Manase goes to the war, Manase comes back, Manase needs a wife, so some neighbors say, hey, I know a lady. They get married, they've never met, they don't know each other, they have nothing in common, of course. And she is just happy to be with somebody who is doing well and hopefully will go on to make a lot of money and make her very comfortable. That's actually her motivation for this. It's stated outright in the book. And as you may imagine, they have a pretty detached marriage, and that was done really oddly. It feels like they have no connection to each other at all, except they live in the same house. And so you sort of wonder why Manase didn't just stay single. And she absolutely abhors his hobby. She hates the fact that he goes off and collects these stones. She can't stand it, but it doesn't cause anyone any harm. And the reason she can't stand it, this is also in the book, is that it doesn't make any money. She's mad that he's doing something that doesn't make any money, that has absolutely no benefit for her. So they have 2 sons, and Manase is very detached from them as well until his oldest son starts to take an interest in rocks, and he gets very, very good at it to the point where he knows a lot more about rocks even than his father does. And his father is very proud of him, and he takes him with him places to these geological meetings and things like that. And unfortunately, and this is kind of a spoiler, but it's early on in the book, and it is a very big plot point to the remainder of the book, so I'm going to tell you what it is. Manase goes off on a business trip. His son wants to collect some rocks, and the rocks he wants to collect are in a cave. And he goes with his younger brother to this cave, and he is murdered. And we're not entirely sure who did that or why or what even happened. We just know the facts of it. So Manase comes back from his business trip and finds out what has happened. And the rest of this book is about Manase coming to terms with what has happened to his son, the dissolution of his marriage. His wife hates him, absolutely hates him, and blames him for their son's death, even though he was far away. And then also it is what happens to his younger son. And over a path of like 20 years, but it's told very, like I said, it's told in a very practical, blunt sort of way. There's not a lot of emotional, there's not a lot of emotional connection going on in this book. Manase is a very detached person, and we as a reader are very detached from Manase. And it was really hard for me to connect with someone who seems to have no connection to his own life, who just sort of does things because it's the easiest thing to do. He comes back and runs his store this bookstore because it was the easiest thing for him to do. He marries a woman he doesn't know because it's the easiest thing for him to do. And his whole life is so detached. It was hard for me to connect with him as a character. And I felt that took away something from the book for me. some of the things that happen towards the end. I don't want to spoil it or anything. Uh, it's an interesting little book, and it's short and easy to read. And you may get more out of it than I did. I found the geology parts very interesting. I thought that Manasse's hobby was really interesting. I sure hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I thought his hobby was very interesting. And I thought that what happened to his younger son was very interesting as well, because his younger son would have been about 18 or 19. He would have been a student, and in the era that this is taking place in, there were student uprisings in Japan, and it had to do. I don't exactly know what it had to do with. I've read very, very little about it. Uh, it's sort of like got to do with the. I think Yukio Mishima was involved in that a little bit. I don't know if that's the same thing, but it was during that same era. And uh, that was very interesting what happened to him. I don't want to say what it was. Like I said, I talked about the what happened to the oldest son because it is the pivotal plot point of this that sets on the whole book. And in a lot of ways, Manasseh starts to live more in the past than in the present, and we get to see a little bit more of what happened in the cave in the Philippines, and to come to understand that perhaps Manasseh had more to do with that than we are initially led to believe. And it was interesting. I didn't care for the detached style of writing. I had a hard time connecting with any of the characters in this because it seemed like they really, I didn't feel their emotional connection with one another. Not even the mother with her sons. Uh, so yeah, I mean, one of these days it might be worth a reread or something to see if I get more out of it, but I don't know if that will ever happen. So that is Hikaru Okuizumi's The Stones Cry Out, and I hope so much that I got his name right. I probably did not. If I didn't, I apologize. So there are several more books for me to talk about, and hopefully I will be doing another video very soon, perhaps right after this one. Uh, one reason I've been having trouble doing videos lately, I think it's because it's very dry in here. And when I sit in front of the camera and talk for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, like my throat dries out entirely and I start to kind of lose my voice. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining me today. Hope you found these books interesting. I feel like I've been talking really fast, but maybe not. Sometimes I think I'm talking really fast and then I watch the video and it's like, man, you're slow as molasses. But anyway, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.